Seraphine did not stop walking. The kingdom was alive around her, noise pouring from every direction, bodies pressing toward the main road, voices climbing over each other in excitement. 18 months. The kings had been gone 18 months, and the entire Crescent Blood Kingdom had chosen today, this time's morning, this time's exact window of chaos and celebration, to welcome them home. She had not planned for this. She had planned for a quiet gate, a distracted guard, a clean exit. She had packed only what she could carry, without drawing attention: a worn traveling sack, a heel of bread, a small skin of water. She had wrapped the dark strip of linen around her eyes before dawn, knotted it firmly at the back of her head the way she had seen healers bind the eyes of fever patients, and she had walked out of the mansion that had never been a home for the last time. Nobody looked at a blind Omega twice. That was the only mercy her situation had ever offered her, and she had used it well. 12 more steps. She could smell the iron of the gate hinges, the worn wood of the post, the particular coolness of air that existed just beyond the threshold of the kingdom's boundary. Freedom had a scent. She had memorized it. The horns blared again, louder, triumphant, shaking the air in her chest. The crowd erupted. Somewhere behind her, hooves struck cobblestone in steady, powerful rhythm, and the ground carried the vibration up through the soles of her feet. 8 more steps. She kept her chin level, her steps measured. One hand slightly extended the way the truly sightless learned to move through the world. The crowd was too consumed with craning their necks toward the procession to spare a glance for one small woman moving in the opposite direction. 1 to 4 more steps. Then the wind changed. It rolled through the kingdom like a living thing. A gust that swept down the main road and hit her full in the face. And with it came something that had no business existing. Something she had no name for and every name for. 3 scents, layered and distinct and devastating all at once: pine and wood smoke, rain-soaked earth. Something darker beneath it all, like iron and flowers that only opened at night. Her wolf, the part of her she had spent 5 years learning to silence, to starve, to lock behind the thickest walls she could build, did not stay silent. It threw its head back, and times howled, times inside her chest. No. The word cracked through her like cold water. No. Not now. Not them. Not today of all days. She kept walking. Stop. Stop. One word. Low and absolute. The kind of command that did not need volume because it carried the weight of something that had never been disobeyed. The kind of voice that did not belong to a man who asked. The crowd, mid-cheer, stuttered into silence, as if the sound had been pulled from the air. Seraphine's foot hovered over the final step. She put it down anyway. Bring that woman to us. The hands that closed around her arms were not rough. That surprised her. She had expected rough. She had learned to expect it. But the guards who turned her were careful in a way that felt almost like an apology, steering her forward through a crowd that parted like water. Every face turned toward her with the hungry, shameless attention of people who smelled something worth watching. She composed her breathing. In through the nose, slow. Out through the mouth, measured. She kept her linen-bound eyes aimed slightly left of center toward the largest heat source, the tallest of the 3 figures who had dismounted and now stood watching her approach. She did not track the second figure that had begun to circle her left flank, testing her periphery. She did not react to the third, standing utterly still, watching with the patience of a man who already knew the answer to every question he hadn't asked yet. 3 pairs of eyes, 3 sources of that scent. Her wolf pressed against her ribs like a caged thing. We're quiet, she told it. Not now, not ever. From the crowd, A voice she recognized Mira, sweet-faced and vicious Mira, who had once pressed her hand and told her to times be grateful. Seraphine, some of us would give anything for a mate of his rank times, spoke just loud enough to be heard by everyone nearby. Probably cursed them with those dead eyes. We always said she brought misfortune. Seraphine did not flinch. She had survived far worse than Mira's words. She had survived things that would have unmade Mira entirely. The kings exchanged something wordless, a glance, a decision. The silent language of three men who had shared a womb and 18 months of hard roads and apparently did not need speech to reach agreement. Clear the courtyard. Everyone. Now, the crowd dissolved. Not quickly, they peeled away with reluctance, looking back, dragging their feet. The gates closed. And then there was only silence, and the breathing of three men and 4 guards facing outward with their backs to all of it. Seraphine waited. Footsteps approached, deliberate, unhurried. A presence settled at her left ear, close enough that she felt warmth, felt breath against her temple, felt the particular gravity of someone who was choosing their words with great care. The voice, when it came, was quiet, almost gentle. Almost. Stop pretending. We know you are not blind. Her heart stopped. Her face did not move. She counted 10 full seconds in the silence that followed. Then, slowly, with the steadiness of a woman who had learned to control every visible thing about herself, she turned her head, and for the first time in 3 days, she let her eyes focus, sharp, clear, meeting the gaze of the king crouched at her eye level, the one with the rain-soaked earth scent, watching her with something caught between fury and wonder. He did not look surprised that she could see. He looked like a man who had just found something he hadn't known was missing and had already decided, in the space of a breath, that he was furious at whoever had taken it from him. "How long?" he said quietly. "Have you been trying to leave?" Seraphine looked at him, looked at the other 2 standing behind him, one like a storm barely contained, one like still water over deep rock. "Before we proceed, let's get to know each other. I want to know my fans. Where are you watching from right now? This is a powerful story of survival, pain, and finding love again when you thought it was gone. If stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe. We're pushing to 2,000 strong. I read every single comment, so don't stay silent. Now, let's continue the story." She had rehearsed silence for 5 years. She had rehearsed stillness. She had rehearsed how to make herself small enough to survive in a mansion that wanted to swallow her whole. She had never rehearsed this 3 men looking at her like the truth mattered, like times she times mattered, and she almost didn't know how to speak under the weight of it. They brought her to the king's private war room. Nothing like a cell, which confused her body more than a cell would have. She sat on the edge of the chair the way she sat everywhere, weight forward, close to the door, ready to move. She had not been fully comfortable in a seat in 5 years. A goblet of water appeared before her. She stared at it. Old habit times check everything. Trust nothing. 5 full seconds passed before she lifted it and drank. Ryle noticed. His eyes darkened. "Your name," Darian said. "Seraphine. Omega. Unranked." She set the goblet down. "Formerly mated to Zoran. Your Gamma." The room temperature dropped. Caspian stiffened at the window. Darian went very still. Rael said nothing, but something behind his eyes caught fire and stayed there. "Tell us," Darian said quietly. She told them, because half a story would condemn her faster than the whole truth. "The first year," she began, "I believed the bond would fix him." She had been 18 when the bond snapped into place, young, hopeful, foolish in the way only the unbattered could afford to be. Zoran was powerful, respected, handsome in the cold way of men who knew their own worth precisely. She had told herself that what happened on the third night of their mating was the bond settling. She had told herself that again on the 7th night, and the 14th. By the 2nd month, she stopped telling herself anything. She simply endured. The first year, he used his fists rarely. He preferred other methods, words that found every soft place inside a person and pressed until something cracked. He would bring women to the mansion and ensure Seraphine heard. When the bond made her physically ill with the pain of it, he would stand in the doorway of whatever room she had retreated to and watch her face. He collected her suffering the way other men collected trophies. The 2nd year, she said, I tried to leave. She had made it as far as the eastern boundary before the bond dragged her back. Not metaphorically, physically. The feral pull of an unbroken mate bond on an omega who had not been formally rejected was like a hook behind her sternum, reeling her in until she collapsed at the boundary line and could not go further. She had lain in the grass for an hour before she walked herself back. Zoran had been waiting. That was the first time the beating was bad enough to keep her in bed for 2 days. But her omega healing was fast unnaturally, cruelly fast, and he knew it. He never let her leave the mansion until every mark had closed, until her skin was smooth and her eyes were clear, and there was no evidence left that anything had happened at all. He was patient, she said. He understood that the body tells stories. He simply waited until mine had finished speaking. The 3rd year, she went to sensitivity, difficulty adjusting to mated life, recommend patience and rest. Then he had called Zoran without telling her he would, and Zoran had arrived within the hour, voice soft with concern, brow creased with worry, and explained gently that his mate had a fragile constitution, that he was doing everything he could, that it broke his heart to see her struggle so. Every man in that room had believed him. She had walked home beside her abuser in silence, while he smiled at the road ahead. The 4th year, she went to the council. She had bruising beneath her sleeves that day, a fresh set, still tender because he had miscalculated the timing, had not left enough healing hours before a mandatory council function forced her into public. She sat before Councilman Forte and said the words she had been organizing in her mind for months. Forte had looked at her the way adults look at children inventing stories for attention. He summoned Zoran. Zoran performed grief so convincingly that she had almost believed it herself. That single horrible second where his eyes filled and his voice broke, and she thought, is this real? Is any of this real? Am I losing my mind? And then it passed, and she saw the tiny flicker of satisfaction he allowed himself when he noticed her doubt. The council dismissed her complaint, formally, in writing. Even Beta Harkin, who had once glimpsed a mark on her wrist when she had rolled her sleeve too quickly, had looked at it, paused, and instead of asking her, had gone to Zoran. Zoran had laughed, easy and warm, and said she was clumsy, that she had caught herself on a fence post during her morning walk, that he kept telling her to be more careful. Harkin had laughed with him, had never once looked her in the eye about it again. The jealous ones, she continued flatly, told me to be grateful, that some omegas never find a mate at all, that a man of his rank choosing me was grace I did not deserve to question. She said all of this without crying. She had run out of tears in year 3. Her body had quietly redirected the energy. The 5th year, she said, I stopped trying to be believed. I started trying to survive. She had watched him carefully by then, the way a trapped animal watches its captor, learning rhythms, learning weaknesses. She had learned one truth about Zoran, above all others. He was a man who could not keep broken things. He needed perfection around him. He collected it. A blind mate permanently, visibly flawed, was something his pride could not absorb. But she knew he would never reject her while she remained whole. He enjoyed her suffering too much. Her healing made sure she was always whole. So she made herself not whole. The last night, he came home drunk and loud and took what he called his right. And when she said, "Times I cannot, I am not strong enough tonight," he hit her with the back of his hand and then did not stop. It was the worst of all the beatings. She lay on the floor afterward and felt, with calm certainty, that if she remained visible and healable and times his, she would not survive the year. So, when morning came and her body had mostly knit itself back together, she wrapped dark linen around her eyes, practiced 3 days of careful blindness, and waited. He came home the 4th night, looked at her eyes beneath the linen. His face moved through several expressions before settling on disgust. "I reject you," he said, like throwing away something that had stopped being entertaining. The bond snapped. It hurt gods, it hurt, but underneath the pain was something she had almost forgotten the texture of. Room to breathe. "I knew he would reject me," she told the 3 kings quietly. "I just needed to make it his idea." The silence that followed was the heaviest thing she had ever sat inside. Caspian had both palms pressed flat against the wall, head bowed, shoulders shaking with controlled fury. Darian had not moved marble still, but his eyes were doing something terrible and quiet. Rael stood 3 steps away from her, his hands curling into fists and releasing, curling and releasing, like a man fighting very hard against his own instincts. It was Darian who broke the silence. He asked for evidence, names, records, witnesses. She gave him every one. Elder Moss, Councilman Forte, Beta Harkon, the gate records of her turned-back attempts, the council's written dismissals, the maids who had looked away, all of it. The kings exchanged a look that she could not fully read, but whatever it contained, it was enormous. Caspian turned from the wall. His voice, when it came, was the quiet of something that had decided not for the last time, not to detonate. "Where is Zoran? Right now?" "Not yet." Rael's hand closed around his arm. Caspian breathed. Then he looked at Seraphine, and something in his expression settled into a decision. "We are going to need you to remain blind a little longer." She met his gaze steadily. "How long?" His jaw tightened. "Until we burn it all down properly." She had agreed. Not because she trusted them. Trust was a currency she had spent down to nothing over 5 years, but because she was still inside kingdom walls with nowhere to go, and 3 men who knew her secret. Agreeing was simply the most logical move left on the board. That was what she told herself. By morning, the announcement had been made. The blind Omega found at the gate had been placed under royal protection, a mercy from the returned kings, a demonstration of their benevolence. No further explanation was offered, and the absence of explanation was its own kind of fuel. By midday, the kingdom was burning with it. The welcoming court assembled in the great hall, every high-ranking official summoned to pay their respects to the returned kings. Seraphine stood just behind Rael's left shoulder, with the linen wrapped firmly around her eyes, and her hands clasped before her, and her face arranged into the patient blankness she had perfected over years of pretending she felt. Nothing. She heard him before she smelled him. That particular stride, even unhurried, the walk of a man who had never once doubted the ground would hold him. "Zoran." He greeted the kings with warmth, with practiced deference. His voice was exactly what it always was in public, rich, measured, the voice of a man beloved by everyone who had never been alone with him. She heard him laugh at something Caspian said, the laugh that sat just below the surface of his real self, like a mask bolted on. She did not move, did not breathe differently, did not turn her linen-bound eyes even slightly in his direction. But she felt his gaze find her, felt it like a brand. Beneath the sightline of the court, Rael's hand moved back and pressed briefly, barely, against her wrist. "I'm here." 2 words that weren't even spoken. Just pressure, just warmth, just the quiet, impossible fact of someone standing between her and the thing that had broken her. She almost broke instead. She didn't. Darian moved quietly. That was his nature, still water, deep current. While Caspian managed the court's surface and Rael managed Seraphine's, Darian sent his own men into the kingdom's underbelly. Wolves, loyal to the crown directly, bypassing every administrative channel Zoran and Beta Harkon controlled. They pulled records. Complaints filed by Omegas and Wolfless Pack, members buried, denied, redirected. Medical reports with inconsistencies that required a physician's signature to falsify. Gate logs that showed exactly how many times Seraphine had attempted to leave and been turned back on standing orders from the Gamma's office. Resource ledgers with figures that did not survive scrutiny. 2 deaths in the past 3 years recorded as accidents with witnesses who had never been formally interviewed. Darian read through the files alone one night, while the fire burned low. When he finished, he set the last page down and stared at the wall for a very long time. The kingdom he had trusted was not the kingdom he had left. They rotated around her without discussing it, as if their instincts had divided her protection between them and distributed it evenly, naturally, the way breathing was distributed. It simply happened. Caspian said little. He was gruff in the way of men who felt things too large for ordinary words and had stopped trying to find them. But he was always within 20 feet of her. Always. She clocked it without meaning to old survival habit. Always know where the power in the room is, and found that his particular brand of silent, immovable presence was almost easier to bear than kindness would have been. She didn't have to perform gratitude for a wall. The wall simply held. Darian spoke to her like she was intelligent. Like her assessments of people and patterns mattered. Like her 5 years of careful observation inside a corrupt household were times, useful times, rather than shameful. He asked questions and then listened to the answers without interrupting. She had to look away the first time he did it. She was not accustomed to being listened to and was embarrassed by how much it affected her. Rael was the most dangerous of the 3, and she knew it within the first day. He talked to her like they had known each other for years. Easy, quiet, without the careful distance the other 2 maintained. He did not treat her like something fragile or something wounded. He treated her like someone who had survived. And that was simply a fact about her, not the most interesting thing about her. It was infuriating. She found herself talking back, found herself almost times comfortable in the spaces his conversation made. She hated it. She sat with herself at night and watched herself hating it, and understood that the hating was fear, wearing different clothes. The court, meanwhile, was generating its own weather. The theories had evolved past simple gossip into something more organized. The blind Omega under royal protection. The kings who had stopped a procession for a rejected nobody. Mira, who had enough spite and enough social currency to weaponize both, had begun circulating a quiet, persistent suggestion that Seraphine had times enchanted times them. That she was dangerous. That blind eyes in a wolf could carry curses the way stagnant water carried sickness. That no Omega of no rank had any business breathing palace air. Zoran heard all of it. He stood in the right places and smiled in the right moments and let the theories grow around him like cover. But at night, behind the doors of his estate, his smile dropped. He was thinking. He was planning. And Seraphine, who had spent 5 years learning to read the silence between his moods, felt it somehow the distant shift in pressure, like weather changing before the clouds arrived. She was crossing the corridor toward the king's wing on the 3rd evening, when a maid stepped from a doorway and fell into step beside her. The voice that came was low, quick, designed to be heard by no one else. "He knows you can see. He says to tell you, blind or not, you are still his." Seraphine did not break stride, did not turn her head, did not let a single muscle in her face acknowledge that she had heard anything at all. She walked the rest of the corridor at the same measured pace, reached the king's wing, waited for the door to close behind her. Then she told Rael exactly what the maid had said. He was out of the room before she finished the sentence. Caspian was in the hallway in 3 strides, one hand catching Rael's arm. Not yet. Rael turned on him. They stood in the corridor, facing each other, 2 halves of the same barely contained storm, and the silence between them was loud, with everything neither said. "How much longer, Darian?" Caspian called toward the war room. A beat. Then Darian's voice came back flat, certain, the voice of a man who had been counting days and was almost done counting. 3 days, maybe 2. It was 2. Darian spent them the way he spent everything, methodically, without waste. When he finally laid the assembled evidence before his brothers, the war room table disappeared beneath it. Documented complaint trails, medical records bearing Elder Moss's signature alongside injury accounts that did not match his written diagnoses. Gate logs recording every night Seraphine had tried to leave and been turned back on the Gamma's standing orders. Resource ledgers with figures that collapsed under scrutiny. 3 written testimonies from Wolfless Pack members regarding deaths that had been ruled accidental and never investigated. The 3 of them stood over it in silence for a long time. "We call the full court," Caspian said. "We call the full court," Rael agreed. "Tomorrow," Darian said, "and she stands with us." They told her that night. She sat across from all 3 of them and listened without interrupting while Darian laid it out what they had found, what would happen in the morning, what her place in it would be. She would stand with them. She would be seen. She did not have to speak unless she chose to, but they would not hide her. Not anymore. When he finished, she was quiet for long enough that the fire shifted in the grate. "They will not believe me over him," she said finally. "They never have. They will not be choosing between you and him," Darian said. "They will be reading the evidence with their own eyes. There is a difference." She considered that. "And if it fails?" "It won't." Rael's voice was quiet. Not arrogant, something more absolute than arrogance. The certainty of a man who had made sure of it personally. She looked at the 3 of them. These strange, overwhelming, impossibly careful men who had spent 2 weeks dismantling a corrupt kingdom on behalf of a woman they had found at a gate trying to disappear, who had built a case instead of making declarations, who had protected her without making her feel like property in the process. Something shifted in her chest. Small, fragile, unfamiliar. She believed them. Just barely. Just enough. But it was there. And it was the first time in 5 years that word had meant anything at all. The full court assembled the next morning, under the pretense of a royal address, the king's formal first appearance before the kingdom's leadership since their return. Every ranked official was present. Every councilman. Every elder. Zoran stood in his place of honor near the front, polished and unhurried, the picture of a man with nothing to fear. Beta Harkon flanked him. Elder Moss sat in his customary seat on the medical council, his robes pressed, his expression serene. The doors opened. The kings entered, and Seraphine walked with them. Not behind them, not beside them as an afterthought, with times them steady-paced, linen-bound, chin level, hand still. The court rippled the moment they saw her. A current of confusion, resentment, whispered questions passing mouth to ear across the entire assembly. Zoran's smile did not falter, but it tightened, just barely. Just enough for someone who knew his face the way she knew it, to see the exact moment he understood that this morning was not what he had anticipated. Darian stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He began with the medical records. He was methodical, and he was devastating, and he did not pause for reactions or allow space for interruptions. Document by document, name by name, date by date, he built the architecture of 5 years of systematic failure, and the court listened in a silence that kept changing texture, kept getting heavier, kept pressing down on the assembled faces like a hand. Zoran tried to speak once. Just once, a smooth interjection, perfectly timed, the voice of a reasonable man being misrepresented. Caspian turned his head and looked at him. Zoran stopped. Elder Moss broke first. He was oldest, and his nerve was the most brittle, and when Darian placed his signed medical reports beside the documented evidence of Seraphine's actual injuries, the records his own hand had falsified, he seemed to fold from the inside out. His apology began at full volume and shrank with every word until it was barely audible, a man made suddenly, publicly small by the weight of what he had chosen to ignore. Councilman Forte lasted slightly longer, until the gate logs landed on the table before the court. 3 formal complaint attempts by Seraphine at the gate office, 3 documented redirections carried out on standing orders from the Gamma's household. He looked at his own name in the dismissal records and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. One by one, the pillars of Zoran's constructed world came down, and the man himself stood at the center of the collapsing structure and watched it happen with an expression that moved through several phases: disbelief, calculation, fury before landing somewhere cold and still. He looked across the court at Seraphine. "You did this," he said. His voice had shed its warmth entirely. "You blind, worthless. Enough. Enough." Caspian's voice did not rise. It did not need to. It landed in the room like the flat of a blade, and the silence that followed was total. Zoran breathed. And then, and she knew this moment, had memorized this particular stillness in him, the way prey memorizes the pause before a strike, he smiled. The smile she knew. The one that meant he had made a decision. He straightened his spine and turned to address the full court with the ease of a man playing a final card. "Ah, she is not blind. She never was. Everything you have heard this morning was manufactured by a manipulative Omega, determined to destroy a powerful man. Check her eyes yourselves if you do not believe me." Every face in the court turned towards Seraphine. The kings did not move, did not speak, did not rush to explain or defend or fill the silence with anything. They simply waited. Seraphine stood in the weight of every stare, the confused, the hostile, the uncertain, the ashamed, and felt the old familiar pressure of a room full of people prepared to disbelieve her. Then she raised both hands slowly to the back of her head. Her fingers found the knot of the linen strip. Unhurried, deliberate. The court watched in absolute silence as she unwound it one careful turn at a time, unwrapping 5 years of calculated survival until the cloth fell away from her face and dropped to the floor at her feet. She blinked once. Her eyes, clear, sharp, fully focused, swept the entire court without flinching. "No," she said. Her voice was steady, and it carried to every corner of the hall without effort, without performance, without asking anything of anyone listening. I am not blind. I never was. And I am going to tell you exactly why I had to pretend to be. She had spent 5 years being a secret, a problem, a complaint filed and forgotten. Now the entire kingdom was listening. She had imagined this moment before, usually at night, usually as a fantasy she talked herself out of because hope was expensive and she couldn't afford the debt. But here she was, standing, linen dropped, voice steady. And for the first time since she had walked through the gates of this kingdom as a new mate with a borrowed smile and a full heart, she was not afraid. She told it the same way she had told it in the king's chambers, without performance, without tears, without asking anyone in that hall to feel anything on her behalf. She did not want their pity. She had never wanted their pity. She wanted only what she had always wanted and never been given: to be believed. She told them about Elder Moss, about Councilman Forte, about the gate office where she had tried 3 times to file a formal complaint and been redirected each time by guards operating on the Gamma's standing orders. She described walking into every system that existed to protect her and finding Zoran already there, already waiting, already performing concern, already smiling. She told them about the bond that kept her from leaving, the healing that kept her from being seen, the careful architecture of a trap that had no doors. She told them about the linen, the logic of it, the last night that made it necessary. She did not raise her voice. She did not lower her eyes. When she finished, the court was silent in a way it had not been for anything else that morning. Not the silence of shock, not the silence of disbelief. This silence had weight and texture and something else moving through it, something that looked, collectively, like shame. Mira stood near the back of the assembly. Her eyes, which had found Seraphine's face the moment the linen fell, could not hold her gaze now. They dropped to the floor and stayed there. Good, Seraphine thought. And then let it go. She had no energy left for Mira. She had spent 5 years carrying things that weren't hers to carry. She was done. Darian delivered the judgment in the same quiet, methodical voice he had used for the evidence. Each charge was named precisely, stripped of rank, stripped of title, stripped of all pack resources and holdings. Formal criminal charges, abuse of power, assault, systematic document falsification, and complicity in the deaths of 2 pack members, whose cases would be formally reopened. He would face the full royal tribunal. There would be no appeal to the council. The council itself was under review. Tabia. Beta Harkin was suspended immediately, pending investigation. Elder Moss and every councilman whose signature appeared on a dismissal of Seraphine's complaints were placed under formal disciplinary proceedings. Zoran stood through all of it, with his jaw set and his spine straight, and his face arranged into the expression of a man who intended to survive this. He was too proud to fight in front of the court, too calculated to give them the spectacle of his rage. The royal guard closed around him. He walked, and as they guided him past Seraphine, past the woman he had spent 5 years trying to erase, he turned his head and brought his mouth close to her ear. She did not flinch. She had trained herself out of flinching around him years ago. When the guards rounded the corner and he disappeared from sight, Rael was at her side in 4 steps. What did he say? She looked at him steadily. That he will find me when he gets out. The look that passed between the 3 kings then was not rage. Rage was loud and hot and visible. This was something underneath rage, quieter, more absolute. The kind of thing that did not need to be spoken because all 3 of them had already arrived at the same conclusion without discussion. Zoran would face the tribunal. The tribunal would find what Darian's evidence demanded they find. He would not get out, not in a way that could find anyone. The aftermath was not clean, and the kings did not pretend it was. The court shifted on its axis in the days that followed slowly, visibly, like something large correcting its balance. There were wolves who were ashamed, and showed it in their sudden, careful courtesy toward the Omegas and wolfless pack members around them. There were wolves who were furious at having been manipulated and directed that fury, usefully, toward dismantling what Zoran had built. There were wolves who were simply uncomfortable men, and women who had dismissed a woman who was right and now had to decide what kind of people they intended to be going forward. The kings addressed it structurally. A new oversight body, an advocacy office for Omegas and wolfless ranks reporting directly to the crown, bypassing every administrative layer that had failed before. Reformed complaint procedures. Independent physicians. Seraphine sat in the planning session. Not as a symbol, not as a figurehead of suffering placed at the table for appearances. As a voice. She knew where every hole in the system was. She had fallen through all of them. She pointed to each one without flinching and told them exactly how it needed to be closed. And Darian wrote everything down, and Caspian nodded in the slow way of a man rearranging his understanding of something. And Rael watched her speak with an expression she had stopped trying to interpret, because interpreting it did something inconvenient to her composure. That night, she stood on the balcony of her guest chamber and looked out over the kingdom. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that came after something enormous, not peaceful exactly, but emptied out. She breathed the night air and felt the strange, untethered sensation of a woman who had been surviving toward a specific moment for so long that the arrival of that moment had left her without a direction to aim herself. She heard the door behind her. Then, a few minutes later, another. Then, a third. She did not turn around. "You do not have to hover," she said. "We are not hovering," Caspian said, coming to stand at the balcony rail to her left. "We are standing. There is a difference." "We wanted air," Darian said, settling on her right, resting his forearms on the stone. "I wanted to see the stars," Rael said, and positioned himself close enough to her left side that his shoulder nearly touched hers, and tilted his face upward with the easy, unhurried manner of a man who had decided exactly where he wanted to be and was simply being there. She stood between them and looked at the kingdom below and let herself, finally, name the thing she had been refusing to name since the gate. Second, chance, mates. All three of them. The bond had announced itself in that gust of wind, and she had felt it land in her chest, and she had kept walking anyway, because what did the moon goddess know about her life? What did fate understand about 5 years of evidence that powerful men were not safe to love? But she was standing on a balcony with them now, in the quiet, and the bond was warm in her chest instead of painful for the first time in longer than she could remember, and they were not demanding anything. They were just here. "I know what you are," she said quietly. "What we are. I have known since the gate." Nobody spoke. She felt, rather than saw, the shift that moved through all three of them, something held very carefully, held very still. "I spent 5 years with someone who had power over me," she said. "I don't know how to want powerful men. And don't want us for our power," Rael said. He had not looked down from the stars. His voice was the same as it always was with her, unhurried, almost gentle, with that infuriating undercurrent of a man who already knew how things would end and was prepared to wait as long as it took. "We have been a lot of things in this kingdom. Tonight we are just 3 men standing on a balcony who would very much like you to stop looking at us like we are something to survive." She turned her head and looked at him. He lowered his gaze from the stars and met it. He was close. She had not fully registered how close until now, the warmth of him, the particular scent that her wolf had recognized before her mind had caught up. His eyes moved, just briefly, to her mouth. A single, unguarded, second, then back up. And she saw what it cost him, the stillness he imposed on himself, the deliberate step back from an instinct that was clearly pulling in a different direction entirely. She turned and found Caspian watching her with that same quality of careful restraint, jaw set, expression open in a way she suspected it rarely was in public, his hand on the railing close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of it without contact. He wanted to close that distance. Every line of him said so. He chose not to. Darian, when she looked at him, simply said, "We are not asking you to decide anything tonight. Or any night you are not ready," Caspian added. The gruffness in his voice had softened into something that cost him considerably more. "We will still be here," Rael said. "Tomorrow. And after that." She looked at all three of them, these strange, possessive, careful, enormous men who had stopped a procession and built a case and stood at her balcony in the dark because they wanted to be near her and had the discipline not to say so too loudly. Something moved in her chest. Warm, fragile, terrifyingly real. She almost reached for Rael's hand. Almost. Instead, she turned back to the stars and stood beside them in the quiet, and let the bond breathe between all four of them, like something learning to trust its own heartbeat. "Ask me again," she said softly, "when I am ready." Nobody pushed. Nobody celebrated. Rael's shoulder settled against hers barely, gently, so lightly she could have imagined it. She didn't move away. The announcement came at dawn. The three kings presented Seraphine to the assembled court not as a victim, not as a ward, not as a symbol of anything that had been done to her, as a woman under full royal recognition, the crown's protection permanently and publicly attached to her name. The language of the announcement was careful and deliberate, and those listening who understood power understood exactly what it meant. The next announcement, the kings implied without stating it directly, would follow when she was ready. The court received it in a silence that was different from every silence that had come before it. Not confusion, not shame, not the hungry, restless quiet of gossip waiting to happen. Something closer to awe. Mira stood in the crowd and looked at the woman she had once told to be times grateful. She looked at Seraphine standing straight-spined and clear-eyed between three kings in the morning light, not behind. Them, not beneath them times with times them, as though that was simply where she had always belonged, and the kingdom had taken an inexcusably long time to notice. Mira thought about every word she had ever said, every time she had looked at Seraphine's quiet endurance and called it weakness, every time she had envied the rank of the man causing the pain. She understood now that she had been looking at the wrong thing entirely. The jealousy she felt in this moment was a different kind from any she had felt before, not for the power standing beside Seraphine. For the woman herself, who had survived everything, pretended to be broken to escape what was actually breaking her, and walked out the other side still standing. They still standing. The morning light caught Seraphine's face, and she did not squint against it. She looked into it directly, openly, with the eyes she had hidden for weeks and the stillness of a woman who had run out of reasons to look away. Three kings stood beside her. And the kingdom, finally, slowly, imperfectly, the way all real things change, began to understand what it had almost lost at its own gate.